Hello, welcome to This Week in Politics. Well, we had the shooting in our public school in Florida, and we talked about it last week. This week, the talk has been all about how to take care of our children, and it never really occurred to me until this week, and I spent almost all week thinking about this. And somebody said something that kind of struck a chord with me, and they said we put armed guards to protect our money. We have armed guards to protect our leaders. We have armed guards to protect everything of value except our kids. So then I thought, okay, well, let's look at that. Through all of the shootings, through all of the school shootings that we have had, there has been very little done to protect our kids. Now, as I understand it, there are the school system in Pittsburgh, I believe, somewhere in Philadelphia, installed metal detectors at all their schools, and there hasn't been any incidents there. I mean, so in small pockets, things have been done, but by and large, um, very little has been done. So everybody's been talking this week about the different ideas that they could do, and they were all over the board. So I thought what I would do is I would try to put as many of the ideas together in one place. We'll take each one out. We'll kick the tires, look under the hood. Some will be in the box, some will be out of the box. Some will be old ideas, some will be new ideas, but I want to look at each of them. And then at the end of the program, I want to go through and make a kind of collective, suggestive thing that could be done to help protect our kids. Now, the first one I want to talk about is one that I just mentioned a second ago, metal detectors. Now, it is my understanding that a school or anybody could buy a metal detector for around $500 retail. Now, if the government were to buy that, they could get them cheaper. I was also talking to a buddy of mine at work, and he said that when Columbine first happened at the school district here where I live, the school closed all of the entrances to the school except one main entrance. So everybody had to come in and leave through one door. What if we did that on a daily basis and put one metal detector there? That would probably eliminate anything coming into the school. Now, the exception to that would be somebody that just charged through with the gun and shot everybody in their path and just shot their way in. But that isn't the way most of these have been happening. So at least the way that it's been happening would be eliminated. So metal detectors, I think, are a good idea. Now the way around that, if I were a criminal, well, there's a new kind of 3D printing that you can do on a computer, and I believe, and I saw a show on this, I don't remember the material, but there is a way that you can make a gun uh, that is non-metal that is viable for shooting. That would not eliminate that. So if it is a solution, it's a partial solution and a short-term solution. But metal detectors definitely would serve a point. Um, I think the number one thing that we could do, and being a Christian, I believe the number one thing we can do to help protect our children is prayer. One of the that was one that I never heard anybody mention anywhere in any of the conversation all week. Nobody suggested prayer. Well, now logic says, why would God want to protect a place where he's been kicked out of? And he got a good point. I saw something on the internet that said, God, how could you allow our kids to be killed in school? And God said, I'm not allowed in schools, and our society has paid and will continue to pay a price for keeping God out of our schools. We're not allowed to publicly pray. We're not allowed to post the Ten Commandments or read the Bible, all those things. So, but still, prayer never hurts, and I strongly would suggest everyone to pray for our children in schools. A third suggestion is armed guards. Now, the argument for armed guards is this: it would be a definite deterrent. It would inhibit people feeling free to walk in with the gun, um, and it would definitely make everybody feel more secure. The downside to having armed guards in our schools is it would uh, conceivably portray the idea that our schools are prisons or institutions that the government is in charge of. And well, they are, frankly. It would we just like to pretend that they're not. They truly are institutions. They are large buildings where the government indoctrinates our children, so it would look like what it is. But that's my opinion of it. But armed guards, again, has some benefits, has some detriments, and again, the downside to having armed guards is somebody just shoots their way in. Um, that assumes the armed guard is standing at the door, um, not moving around. But armed guards would be a definite deterrent. Would definitely have the effect of, even if somebody got in and did start shooting, they would only get a couple of shots off before an armed guard would kill them, unless, of course, they do it um, in Florida, where the guards stand outside the school till the killing is done and wait for him to come out. Unbelievable. But anyway, so armed guards. So we've looked at metal detectors, prayer, and armed guards. Um, Now, instead of armed guards, what if we had police? Uh, like for an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon. Well, I mean, sure, that might help, but anybody that's going to do that, I mean, as an example, the 17-year-old that just did this one down in Florida, he knew what the schedule was of everybody there. Uh, so if you go to school there, you would know that there is a policeman there in the morning and in the afternoon, but nobody there around lunchtime. So when do you go? You go around lunchtime. So unless the police are going to be there on a permanent basis, I don't see that as a viable alternative. Now, this is the one that's creating a lot of controversy, and that is armed teachers, concealed carry for the teachers. I think it's a great idea. I think most teachers think it's a great idea. Here's the downside. Um, there are a lot of schools on a regular basis where the kids are bigger than the teachers. In fact, in most high schools, most of the men in those schools are taller than the women that are teaching them. They're bigger, stronger. So to have a female carrying a concealed weapon and having a school full of men that are bigger than and stronger than she is presents the opportunity for them to just steal the gun and shoot her. So that's a definite detriment. I mean, I can't tell you how many videos I've seen on YouTube about students um, getting physical with their teachers. I think it's despicable. I think it's disrespectful. I think it's criminal. Um, but that's the world we live in. Again, when you kick God out, this is the slime that comes to the top. Now, the upside would be um, that every teacher, anybody that got in there, even if you got the teacher in one class and some of the kids, the teachers in the other classrooms would have guns to come get him. So, what the shooter might get a few, but he wouldn't get as many as they're getting now. Someone would kill him. So it does have its detriments. Um, and especially if these teachers are willing to do this and to conceal carry. I mean, think of the world that we live in where a teacher has to be trained and carry a gun to keep peace and protect the children. It's a sad world. It's a sad commentary on our society, but that's what it's come to. And I do think if they agree to that, they should be paid more for that. Um, and I think you ought to make it optional. I don't think you need to make it mandatory. You make it optional. Um, Now, here's the one that I like: homeschool. The reason that these shootings are happening is because there's a large population, all unarmed, all unprotected, all smaller and weaker, and you could just shoot till your heart's content. Now, this 17-year-old went in there and shot and murdered and maimed and walked out, and now he's alive and he's well, and sure, he's in prison, but he's still alive. So, what if we take away the mass population and homeschool? I think all Christians should be homeschooling their kids anyway. Our schools are teaching evolution. They are teaching racism, whether they know it or not. They are teaching immoral behavior, i.e., uh, perverted sex education. They are teaching that abortion is right. All of the things that are against God is what our kids are being indoctrinated with. And for that reason, if no other, I think that Christian families should be homeschooling their kids. A side benefit to that would be that when these schools are getting shot up, if your kids aren't in the schools, they're not going to get shot up, right? So, of the list so far, that seems to be the most surest way to keep your kids from getting shot is to homeschool them. Now, we've talked about metal detectors, prayer, armed guards, police, concealed carry for our teachers, and we talked about homeschool. Now, at the end of this video this week, I'm going to bring what I call a local fix. And I just want to bring the concept out now so that when I go to it later, it'll make sense. I don't think there can be a one size fits all solution to this. Um, as an example, in a school that has thousands and thousands and thousands of kids, is it really practical to close all of the entrances except one? Is it really practical to have one armed guard? Is it really practical to make it optional for teachers to be armed? Um, and what about camera systems? I haven't seen any camera footage from any of these schools, and yet I find it hard to believe that none of them have camera systems. So I think each school district should look to implement a local fix. for their specific needs. Now, there are these next 2 or 3 are going to be out of the box. Remember I said some are going to be in and some are going to be out. And one I want to talk about is, what about school by computer? Now I've had this idea for a long time, and I was running it by some people, and the question kept coming up. Well, what about? So let's say that the way it would be was you would register for school, the kids would receive a computer, um, and every day from 9 to 3 they would be on this computer. They would have one teacher teaching them from a central location. So I mean, so let's say in this school district that I'm in, we could theoretically, I mean, if we made it mandatory, we could have one fifth grade teacher, one fourth grade teacher, one third grade teacher, one second grade teacher, and they would teach all those classes from one spot. So instead of having in a district, instead of having 75 fifth grade teachers, we have one. That would lower the cost. We could get rid of the real estate that the school districts have. We could lower the funding for schools. Now, the objection is, so who watches the kids before and after school then? Here's my suggestion. Each school district receives X amount of dollars per day per kid. That's why they take attendance, by the way. They really don't care if your kid's there or not. They just want to make sure they get paid for the kid. But let's say that dollar amount, and I have no idea what the amount is, but let's just say that it's $100 a day. What if we took and gave that $100 to the family? So let's say I have a kid in school and the school district is getting paid $100 a day for my kid. What if we took that $100 and gave it to the family and said, family, we're going to teach your kid by computer. We don't need $100. All we need is $10. So we're going to give you $90 and you can hire help to watch your kid for the day. Do you think you might be able to find a babysitter for $90 a day? I think so. In fact, all of the teachers that might be displaced by this type, instead of having a school classroom of 30 kids, they might be paid close to the same amount to watch one kid. So I think, and if you made this optional, what if it wasn't mandatory, but we gave the kids an option? You can go to the school like you do now, or you can have school at home by computer. And if you decide to do that, then we'll give you the $90 a day, and then the teacher that teaches the class will get the $10 a day. You see what I'm saying? So some would choose one, some would choose the other, and it really wouldn't make a difference. But if enough people took that up, and I'm sure a lot of people would, frankly, we could consolidate our school districts. We could have fewer teachers, fewer expenses, fewer real estate, fewer administrators, and I'll free up a lot more money in our budgets. So, school by computer, I think that's a thing. I mean, my daughter is going to college right now, and this semester all of her classes are online. So I know it's possible. I know it's a thing. Um, Question is, do we want to take it mainline? Do we want to do it for young children? And can we do it in such a way that it is a viable way to teach our children and to protect them simultaneously? Here's another one that is outside the box. All of these suggestions are built on the idea that we have public schools. I think we should be asking a different question. Should we have public schools? Public school is not in the Constitution. That is not something the government should be providing. In my opinion and in my experience says that when governments get involved in education, it ceases to be education and it starts to be indoctrination. I've lived overseas in autocratic societies. I know this to be a fact. When the government is involved, it's not education, it's indoctrination. So, what if we made all schools, what if we closed all the public schools? We just closed them tomorrow. And we said, like public school number 13 is now closed. Anybody that would like to start their own school and buy it, the building is for sale. You can start your own private school. The government would get out. The government would stop writing a check. Some entrepreneurs would buy the building. They would start charging tuition. They would find economical ways to teach our children, and it would be private education. Then it's education. I think that is a viable option. I think that is something we should look at. We should not just assume that because we have public schools, and by public, let's not lose the definition here. Government-run schools. Just because we have government-run schools does not mean that is the proper way to educate our children. If it were, we would have outstanding test scores in comparison to the rest of the world. We do not. And we do not because our government is involved. They say they want to increase the standards. The proof is not in the pudding. The proof is not in the pudding. It's all about indoctrination with the government. They want to have stupid sheeple. Stupid sheeple are much easier to control to control and to take over than educated human beings are. Private education or homeschooling would make sure that our children are educated instead of indoctrinated. The goal here is to get the government out of the way and let the people do what we do, not only in business, but also in educating and protecting our children. Now, this one, you have to kind of think outside the box to see how this would work. But what if we had tougher sentencing laws for gun crimes? You know, if you do a crime with the gun, what if the sentence was automatically doubled? Or instead of a misdemeanor for carrying a weapon, we turned it into a felony. And that felony carried massive fines and massive education requirements and massive relicensing for every single time. And there's no 3 strikes, you're out, 2 strikes and you're out. You get caught committing a felony with any gun, you lose it permanently. You don't ever get a gun. Most of the people that have done these shootings have done things with guns in the past. And I think if you do the research, you will find that to be true. Now, the last one I want to talk about before I go through and talk about my local fix is this one. And I don't remember where this was at, but the local school district had set up with the police department to have an office annex inside the school. I mean, it would be a police station, substation, you know, and they would have their geographic. They would have a room. They would have a couple of desks. The phone systems hooked up to the police department. The computers hooked up to the police department, and every way they would be part of the police department, except geographically, they would be a couple of officers would be located inside the school. I think it's a great idea. In the old days, and old days, I mean, pre 1990, that wasn't viable because a police officer needs to be in touch uh, to know, minute by minute from the police department what's going on, and all information and paperwork and computer work and all those things that make a department is there for a reason. And the policemen need to have access to that. But today, in the age of computers and cell phones and walkie-talkies and cameras, they you could geographically be anywhere and still be hooked into your police department. I think that is a great idea. Uh, they would have their own place. They would come and go. One of them would be assigned to the school so that the office is always manned, and one would be out on patrol, or you can do it in two or threes. But to have a permanent presence at the school from the police department, I think is a great idea. Um, so let's take a look. Let's take a look. Let's make some sound suggestions here. First off, as I said earlier, I think the answer here is not a one size fits all. I think every school superintendent for every district in the country needs to make their own plan. Let me give you an example. In Montana, as an example, state of Montana, sparsely populated. Okay, school districts out there might have, and I don't know the actual number, I'm guessing, but let's say they have 10 school buildings in a district. Okay, and the kids are coming from miles and miles just to come to school. Okay, their the school district's idea of protecting those kids is a lot different from, or might be, probably should be a lot different than the school district in New York City on Staten Island, where there's a large concentration of schools. There might be 10 schools in a 5-block area. So the way that you protect those kids is different based on geography, based on economics, based on school size, based on budget size, based on practical aspects like manpower and police power. So let me give you an example. I live in Illinois, the capital of Illinois, which is Springfield. We have 3 high schools, um, and I don't know how many other schools. There's probably a total of, including elementary and middle school, there's probably 50 schools, I would guess. Not to mention all the nursery schools and the 3 high schools. Plus, we have 2 or 3 colleges here in town. So, if I were the school superintendent, I would go down the list we just looked at. And the first thing I would do is I would make sure that every school had metal detectors. So let's say we had 50 schools and they cost $500 per, and you needed 2 of them per school. That's $1,000 per school. That's retail. So it's $1,000 per school. You got 40 schools. That's $40,000, and you now have metal detectors on all of your schools. I think short term, that is a no-brainer. That's a got to do right now. But as we talked about, that is probably not going to stop 100%, and it's definitely not going to be a long-term answer because of 3D printing. There soon will be a whole generation of guns that will be generated, in my opinion, by 3D printing that will not use metal, or at least will use metals that will not be detected by a metal detector. Um, so I think immediately I would put those. Now, the second thing I would do, if I were the school district, leader is the first thing I would do is encourage prayer for every school, from every teacher that would meet resistance, but I would still ask for it. A small percentage would do it, but for those that do, that would be a lot better than what they're doing now, which is no prayer at all. Then I would contact the local police department. Now, I do not believe, in my humble opinion, that we need to have on-site police officers in middle school and grade schools. I think logic says you need them in high schools simply for the reason we talked about earlier. The high school guys are bigger than most of the teachers and could easily overpower them. So there, I think you do need a permanent police. So in this town, we have 3 high schools. I would go to the police station. I would say, hey, why don't you set up 3 uh, substations and man it with, take 2 or 3 of your officers and put them in that substation. You know, uh, you could use your own computers, your own phones, your own microphones, your own camera system, everything you need. And you'll have your geographic office, and you could be hooked together by computers and phones and all that, but have a physical presence. All we would ask in return is for a visible, armed presence all during the school day. Now, at 4 in the afternoon, you could close that sub office and have them come to your office or whatever. But let's work out so we can have a subset. And I think the police would do that. Um, so there's 6 officers. Only 3 of them would be doing guarding for 6 hours a day. Or you could have 2 officers alternating off and on, a couple hours each. But work it out so that there is an armed presence. Now, in addition to, or in lieu of, or in conjunction with the police, now I would use um, volunteer, um, ex-military, volunteer cops, volunteer retired cops, retired military, and I would have them conceal carry in civilian clothes. And I would have them just sit in the office, because in most schools, the office is right by the front door. So anybody that comes in will be coming in the front door. If they come in, they're not going to be intimidated by a civilian sitting there or wherever he happens to sit or to be. They're not going to be near as intimidated if he's just dressed as a casual. He could be a school teacher for all the shooter knows. And I would work it out in the district so that if there was, in our example, 40 different schools, and we had, I don't know, 100 different volunteers, that I would put them on a rotation basis so that nobody gets to know who they are. So if you had 100 volunteers, you had 40 schools, um, and there's only 180 school days. So I mean, you do the math. Nobody would know who the guy was that was undercover, and I would utilize that in conjunction with uh, either armed guards or police security. I believe those steps right there would protect the children uh, in the short term. Now, let's think outside the box. If I were a shooter and my goal was to shoot as many innocent kids as I wanted to, and I knew that security was going to be clamped down somehow inside the school, what would I do? I would take a strategic point outside the school where I could shoot children as they came out in a massive burst between the school and the school bus. Or I would follow a school bus, and I would stop the bus and shoot them all. So how do you protect that? Well, that's an issue, and I'm not sure how to do that. But for right here and for right now, the problems that we seem to be having is inside the schools. Let's stop that one. I think these local suggestions that I just made, I think will solve the majority of those. Now, now let's, and I was saying how they could be different. Let's talk about the school out in Montana, where there's, 10 school buildings, 10 schools in the district, and they come from miles around to come to school. Um, that local school district school superintendent might have a different perspective on it. Each school would be smaller, each school would have less children, uh, but those kids out there are usually, they know how to use a gun, and so do the teachers. In that particular instance, I would strongly suggest that every teacher uh, have concealed carry and be paid extra in their paycheck. I would not recommend that for school district here in Springfield, but I would suggest that armed concealed carry for Montana, simply because the size of the school is smaller, and the knowledge and familiarity with guns is much higher in Montana than it is in Illinois. So in that particular instance, I do think metal detectors are still a good idea in those rural schools. But I don't think the police annex is necessary. I don't think armed guards are necessary. But I think a metal detector and then concealed carry by the teachers and staff. And I think that would protect those schools. Now, what about the ultra densely populated school in Staten Island? What will we do there? Well, now here you have a massive influx of humans, um, different sizes, different personalities, different ethnicities, different everything, and everything thrown in. And so when everything is thrown into the pot, I think you got to use pretty much everything. I think you need metal detectors. I think you need armed guards. I think you need concealed carry with the teachers. Um, I think you need volunteers roaming the hallways. And I think you probably need uh, police guarding outside the schools during entrance and exits of schooling. I think all of that is necessary. Now, everything that we have talked about has been to solve the problem that we are having now, a short term fix. I strongly believe that the long term fix for this, if God is not invited back into our schools and our reliance put on Him, this is only going to degenerate. So, we as Christians, we need to spend the time between now and then making the transition to homeschooling our kids, start pushing the idea in the secular world of school at home by computer. I don't like it. I think it just makes it easier to indoctrinate the kids, but here's the upside. If they do it on computer at home, the parents would get an opportunity to watch and see what these teachers are teaching our kids rather than sending them off and we don't know what they're telling our kids at school. At least this way we would know. And by using the money that the school districts would get, we could hire help to help us on those times when we couldn't be there for our kids. Well, that's about all I wanted to talk about on possible solutions for schools today, protecting our children. I'm amazed at how little we have done to protect our kids. It really is a sad state of affairs that we have to arm to protect the weakest members of our society. Second weakest, first weakest is the unborn, and there's nothing to protect them. Even the laws don't protect them. Abortion is legal. They kill over 300,000 American babies every year. and nobody does a dang thing but shoots 17 kids in the school, and the whole country comes unglued. The priorities amaze me. But anyway, now the end of the program, I like to talk about some current affairs that went on this week, just so we can keep things in order. That's why each of our programs' title is a date instead of a title. And the big one that will be remembered forever, in my opinion, this guy was such a huge impact in my walk with Jesus, and that was Billy Graham. He died. Um, he died this last week on February 21st, 2018. Um, he was 99 years old. Um, he was an awesome preacher, evangelist. He was an awesome man of God, and he will be sadly missed. I pray that his offspring, Franklin Graham is doing a great job with the ministry, and he's got his own ministry, and then his daughter, Ann Graham Lotz. What a speaker. What a pastor she is. I think she's awesome. God bless Billy Graham and his family, and I pray that those ministries continue and thrive. And if you are in a financial position where you can support their ministry, support the Billy Graham ministry, or Franklin Graham, or Ann Graham Lotz. Support all three of their ministries. They are all deserving, and they do a great job for Jesus. And on a political note, this is the week where the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is going to hear a case. Well, actually, I believe it's going to go to the Supreme Court. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that gerrymandering that has been done over time by the Republicans was illegal because it favored Republicans. Now, I don't know what planet these people live on, but that has been done since the beginning of time. That has been thought to be the benefit of victory. It's called gerrymandering. You redraw the districts of a line, the district lines to benefit your party. If the Democrats are in office, the Democrats redraw the line. If the Republicans are in office, the Republicans redraw the line. Now, it so happens that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court are all Democrats, and the Republicans are the ones that hold office in the state. So, all they had to do was get the maps to the Supreme Court, and they would overturn them. And that's what happened. However, the Supreme Court there went a step further. They redrew the maps to favor Democrats in the upcoming elections. Now, and here's what I'm saying. Forget Republican, Democrat. If you're a judge and you say these maps are drawn illegally, so I'm going to redraw them, isn't that by definition illegal too? But what they're saying is the maps are redrawn are unfair because Republicans did them. So me as a Democrat, I'm going to redraw these, and that's going to be legal. If the Republicans do it, it's illegal. But if I do it, it's legal. Okay, I'm sorry. That's just I don't even know what word that is. So the state Republicans are seeking an injunction to stop this for changing the lines for this election, and rightly so, by the way. It also violates the U.S. Constitution that that the legislature shall decide election rules called the U.S. Constitution Election Clause. It's very plain. The legislature does that. This is why gerrymandering has been allowed for so long. It's in the Constitution that the legislature decides the drawing of the maps. If they do this and this happens in Pennsylvania, if I'm a Republican, I'm going to go to California and I'm going to do the same case in California. Because if it's good enough there, then it's good enough in California, and we'll redraw all of those districts out there to be Republican. This is the biggest travesty I've ever seen. This is more than legislating from the bench. This is judge, jury, and executioner on the bench in Pennsylvania. These guys ought to be put in jail for this. Again, let me explain what happened. The Republicans, now every 10 years is when this is done. They redraw the district maps. It's voted on in the legislature, and in Pennsylvania, the Republicans had the majority. The map passed. The Democrats got upset, took that map to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, who are Democrats. The Democratic court in Pennsylvania said what the Republicans did was illegal. So we're going to do it. The judge is going to do it, and then it'll be legal. That's the same as saying, when you shoot somebody, it's illegal, but if I shoot somebody, it's legal because I said so. That's the dumbest logic I've ever heard, and yet, unless they get this injunction, this court has already redrawn the district lines, and it favors Democrats in the upcoming election. This is so wrong. Even if it gets turned over, the effect will still be felt, and Democrats will still win those seats. And that's what the Democrats are counting on. Even if it's turned over, if they pick up a couple of seats, that's all they care about. This is wrong. This needs to be handled. And this is the week that the Republicans are seeking an injunction order against the Democratic court in Pennsylvania. Well, that's about all I wanted to talk about. This program and all the programs that we do are produced by the Prayer Box Ministry. You can find us online at www.prayerboxministry.org. Now, one of the things that we started this year for the first time is we are not putting any of our videos on our social websites. If you want to see videos of any of our programs, you will need to watch them on our website at prayerboxministry.org. The website itself is an interactive website. There's lots to do over there. You can join a prayer group, have somebody read the Bible to you, watch our programs being streamed. There's a lot going on over there. Check us out, www.prayerboxministry.org. Well, that's program, everyone. Thank you for watching This Week in Politics. I look forward to next week when we sit down and talk about this week in politics.